Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you're joining me. Thank you for your time, and let's dive straight in. So today's Daf is Bava Metzia Daf 105 Omadei. Conversely, two people engaged in joint venture and recorded both in one document. This will be to the detriment of the borrower. They calculate profits and losses of the two transactions together, and therefore, as long as the profits of one joint venture are greater than the losses of the other, the investor will not suffer the loss. And Rava says this one who receives merchandise for a joint venture from another and lost money in the process, and then made the effort to replace. What does that mean? Made effort to replace. According to most commentaries, the manager took pains to ensure that his gains from the remaining portion of the merchandise nullified his losses. An opinion attributed to the Ravid maintains that this also refers to one who paid out of his own pocket or from the proceeds of other business transactions. He remained in Yonatan. On the other footnote, one who was managing a joint venture failed to inform the investor that he suffered a loss but made a successful effort to replace the principal himself may not demand that the investor accept his share of the original loss. If he did inform him and stated that he, the manager, wants no further part in the agreement, he's entitled to do so, as the manager can withdraw his involvement whenever he chooses. And that's in the Ram Sefer Kinin Hilchet Shluchin Ubitofin 7 2 Shulchan Aruch Yodeh 177:34 in the comment of the Ramah. The loss, but did not inform the investor that he had done so. He may not say later to the investor, bear this original loss with me. Is it because the investor can say to him, it is for this reason that you made the effort to replace the loss, so that you should not be called a loser of ventures. You want to preserve your reputation in order to improve your future business prospects, but did not intend to be reimbursed. And whoever said with regard to these two managers who engaged in a joint venture together, according to Rashi, the date of the termination of this joint venture was arranged ahead of time. Rav Hayagon explained that there was a certain window of opportunity for the sale of each type of merchandise, and they are obligated to keep working together until that time. Rashi adds that the partners had received this merchandise from someone else. He tells for to explain why one of them could not have accepted the merchandise from the other. The Rav claims that the halacha concerning the termination of the partnership applies in the case of the merchandise is applied by one of the partners. Together, they both received merchandise from an investor and profited from it, and one of them said to the other, come, let us divide the profits and terminate the venture, as the halacha is as follows. The halacha is as follows. If one said to him, let us wait and profit more, the halacha is that the second manager, he prevents the first from executing his request, and if instead of requesting the final division of profits and the termination of the venture, one said to the other, at least give me half the profits, and the latter can say to him, the profit is leaned to the principal, meaning that the profits and the principal are considered one single unit, and we can earn much more if we do not set aside the profits. So it continues, and if one says to the other, give me half the profits and half the principal, the latter can say to him, the merchandise for the joint venture is leaned to both of us. As we are equal partners in this venture, you cannot force me to divide it. And if one says to the other, let us divide the profits, niflo, if the two partners accept the merchandise for a joint venture from an investor for a fixed period of time, and one of them wanted to divide up the money between them before the end date, you cannot compel the other to do so. That's from the Shulchan Aruch Yodeh 177:35. The profits and divide the principal. And if you suffer a loss as a result, I will bear the loss with you. His partner cannot say to him, no, I do not desire to do that, since the luck of two people is better. Consequently, I want to continue working together. In all these cases, the claim of the second manager are accepted in the Mishnah. With regard to one who received a field from another to cultivate it and did not want to weed it, with regard to one who accepted a field to cultivate it and did not want to weed it, if the local custom is to weed fields, he may not refuse to do so, even if he proposes to compensate the owner with good quality weed, as explained by the Gemara. That's in the Ram Sefer Mishpat Hilchet Kiwut 8 Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 24. And he then said to the owner, what do you care if I neglect the land? You will not have a lot, since I will give you the amount of produce I owe you, for you granting me tenancy, regardless of the state of the field. Nevertheless, they do not listen to him. The reason is because the owner of the land can say to him, tomorrow you will depart from the field, and I will grow weeds, and it will grow weeds for me, which will remain and disrupt the yield of the field for years to come. The cultivator said to the owner, afterward, when I reap the field, I will plow it and remove the weeds. the owner can say to him, I want superior wheat, not wheat that sprouted among weeds. And if he said to the owner, I will buy good wheat for you from the market, the owner can say to him, I want wheat from my land. And if he says to the owner, I will weed it for you according to the measure of your portion, but no more, the owner can say, you're giving a bad name to my land. And everyone will say it is full of weeds. And the Gemara asks, but didn't we learn in the Mishnah that the reason they did not listen to him is because it will grow weeds for me, indicating that these other claims are not accepted? Well, the explanation must be because the owner can say to him, the seed that fell has fallen. What does that mean? If one received a field to cultivate it and it failed to yield enough produce, if it produced 2 seah, more than the cost of the field's upkeep, he must continue to care for and work the field. Bava Metzia Daf 8:12 Shulchan Mishpat 228:1. In other words, even if the cultivator later plows the land, and removes all the weeds, and seeds remain in the ground and will sprout in the following years. With regard to one who receives a field from another to cultivate and it did not produce, I've said that one. Sorry, from before. Birza din for nafal. The reason does not appear to negate the other arguments, all of which have merit, but this claim alone is sufficient to address all the concerns Chachma Manoah. Rabbeinu Yonatan explains that if wheat seeds fall on weeds, they will fail to sprout. I'll just read that bit again. With regard to one who receives a field from another to cultivate, and it did not produce a sufficient crop to cover the expenses of its upkeep, if it has enough produce to form a pile, what does that mean? Makitzba bichri. Rashi explains that since fields differ in size, the amount of a pile does not correspond to the area of land involved. The Rambam states that the amount of the pile itself is indeterminate, but even though the Gemara says that it must be large enough that a winnowing shovel may be placed in it without falling, such vessels are also not uniform. He is obligated to take care of it and give the owner his share. Rabbi Yehuda says, what fixed measure is a pile? I've said that. There is no inherent measure of produce that is considered sufficient, as it all depends on the size of the plot of land in question. Rather, the relevant issue is whether it has a crop equivalent to the measure of seed for dropping in a field in order to sow it. Gemara, the sages taught, Tanu Rabbanan, Makaba Sada Mechaveir Velo Asa, Im Yesh bo kedei lahamid kiri chayev letaper bo shekacho save lo. With regard to one who receives a field from another to cultivate it, and it did not produce a sufficient crop, if it has enough produce to form a pile, he is obligated to take care of it and provide the owner with his share. This is because this is what he writes to him in the cultivator's contract. I will stand and plow and plant and reap and bind and thresh and winnow and establish a pile before you, and you will come and take half, and I, for my work and expenses, will take the other half. Based on this contract, if it is sufficient produce to form a pile, well, it must fulfill the terms of the agreement. And I'll ask, how much is the amount enough? How much is the amount of enough to form a pile? How large must a pile be? Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Chanina, said, enough for the winnowing shovel to stand in it. So what does that mean? There's a picture here of a winnowing shovel, a rachas. If the pile is big enough that the shovel can be placed there and stand independently without falling, it's considered a sufficiently large pile. The lamb was raised before the sages with regard to a winnowing shovel that protrudes from this side to that side. So what does that mean? Mahai Gisa Lahai Gisa. That's for sight and explain Rabbi Hanana's version of the text, which reads from this side and from that side. According to this version, the dilemma is whether the winnowing shovel was inserted in its wide edge or by its handle. Many commentaries explain the Gemara in this manner, and a similar explanation can be inferred from the Jerusalem Talmud, i.e., whose edges extend beyond the pile. Words are halacha. Is it not considered a pile in which a winnowing shovel can stand or not? The Gemara suggests. Come here proof from that which Rabbi Abahu said. This was explained to me by Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Chanina. Any pile in which the blade of the winnowing shovel cannot see the face of the sun, because it is covered by the pile, is considered a significant one. It was stated that the Amoraim engaged in a dispute concerning this issue. Navy says this pile must be 3 seir in size. A seir is a measure of dry volume first mentioned in Genesis 18:6. It is used by the sages as a point of reference for all measures. Each seir contains 6 kav, which equals 24 log. Estimates of the modern equivalent of a seir range from 7.2 to 14.4 liters. Size, well, then sages of the school of Rabbi Yanai say 2 seir. Reish Lakish says the 2 seir in which they spoke is without deducting the expenses. So what does that mean? Chutz min ha'otzar. The Jerusalem Talmud cites an Amoraic dispute as to whether these deducted expenses are those of only the cultivator or those of the owner as well. Consequently, if we pay the expenses and a profit of 2 seir remains, in that case alone it is considered worthwhile to work the field, but if it cannot produce this amount, the cultivator may neglect the land if he so chooses. The Gemara cites a dispute from a different area of halacha that discusses a similar measurement. We learned in a Mishnah there, in Kadzin 3:6, concerning the halachot of food impurities, with regard to unruly olives. The hard olives and grapes that are pushed out from under the beam, when the fruits are squeezed, are not susceptible to impurity. This halacha applies when there are up to 4 kav of unruly fruit for each core fruit, but if there are more than 4 kav, they are susceptible to impurity. If one gathered them in order to eat, it's susceptible to impurity even if they amount to less than 4 kav. Rambam Sefer Tahara Helchet Te'uma Kanan 1:12. Several explanations of this category has been offered. According to Rashi, unruly olives are those that have failed to ripen, and then the Aruch maintain they are hard olives that are not squeezable, while Rav Hagon says that they are the leftover olives that remain after the olives are squeezed. Olive waste is generally used as animal fodder, but if olives contain sufficient oil to be squeezed, they are not still considered fit for human consumption. The Rambam states that these olives burst out part 2 of the basket while being squeezed, either due to their hardness or for some other reason. According to this opinion, a few olives of this kind may be disregarded, but if they amount to more than 4 kav, they are significant and are susceptible to impurity. And grapes, Beis Shammai hold that they become susceptible to its impurity because they are considered food. Beis Hillel hold that they do not become susceptible to rich impurity because they are of inferior quality and are unfit for consumption. The Gemara asks, what is the meaning of unruly Puritzi olives? Rav Huna said, wicked olives, i.e. olives that barely produce any oil. Rav Yosef said, and what is the verse from which it is derived? Also the children of the wicked Puritzi among your people shall raise themselves up to establish the vision, but they shall stumble. In Daniel 11:14. This verse indicates that the word Puritzi means wicked. Nachman Bar Yitzchak said that the meaning of this word can be derived from here. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar Mehacha. The reason why he finds it necessary to cite a different verse is that one might have thought that the first verse is not referring specifically to the wicked, but to people who tried and failed. He therefore quotes another verse that clearly indicates that Paritzim means wicked people. And that's from the Ivor Sidi on Yosef. If you beget a son that is a robber, a paritz, a shed of blood, Ezekiel 18:10, the Gemara asks, and how much is the amount of unruly olives? When are olives classified as unruly? Rabbi Elazar says they are classified as such if it is possible to extract only 4 kav. Kav is a basic unit of measurement from which many other smaller units are derived. It is equivalent to 1/6 of a seir or 24 egg bowls of oil from one press of the beam. What's the beam? The core of the beam. The beam of an olive press is a large, heavy pole that is placed in a hole in a wall above the basket of olives and weighed down on the other side in such a way that it presses down on the fruit. The olive oil that is squeezed out is collected in a hole in the ground or in special utensils prepared for this purpose. When the fruits are brought in together to the olive press, sages of the school of Rabbi Yanai say they are classified as such if it is possible to extract only 2 seir of oil from one press of the beam. The moral comments, and these sages do not disagree with regard to halacha itself, as the difference between the rulings stems from divergent local practices. This statement of Rabbi Elazar is referring to a place where a core is the largest measurement of volume mentioned in Talmudic sources and contains 30 sayings. Due to a fundamental dispute concerning halachic measurements, there is a significant variation in opinions as to the modern measure of a core, with estimates ranging between 240 and 480 liters. Since they bring in 3 times the amount of fruit, it must produce exactly 3 times as much oil. The sages taught, if a zav, an originally pure person, climbed a tree, so what's the footnote? Alo be'ilan, the halachot of ritual impurity for a zav includes several halachot that do not apply to other types of ritual impurity. One of these is ritual impurity imposed by movement. Any utensil or person that a zav moves from its place is rendered ritually impure, even if he does not come into direct contact with it. Consequently, if a ritually pure individual and a zav was sitting on a shaky surface or an unstable tree that was moved by the zav, it is as though the zav has moved the richly pure individual, rendering him richly impure. That has little strength. If a zav and a richly pure individual were on a shaky surface, such as a weak tree whose trunk is not thick enough for a quarter carved vessel to be carved from it, or a weak branch that would be moved if pushed, a richly pure person has been rendered impure, and that's the Bava Metzia Daf Metamai Mikav Moshev 8:7, which shook as he climbed it, or if they climbed onto a branch that had little strength, and the richly pure person is rendered richly impure. One of the ways the zav imparts impurity is by movement, and here the zav is viewed as having moved the pure person. Gemara asks, what are the circumstances of this tree that had little strength? I.e., how is a tree with little strength defined? The sages at the school of Rabbi Yanai say, it is a tree whose trunk is not broad enough that one can hollow out a vessel of a quarter cup from it. Someone saying that this refers to the spot where the branches begin to separate from the trunk, Chachma Manoah. What are the circumstances of a branch that has little strength? Which, like I said, it is any branch concerning which its circumference can be hidden, i.e. inserted in a person's fist. What does that mean? Nechbeis b'cheziona. There are numerous versions of interpretation of this phrase. Rashi associates the term in a fist, cheziona with the term in his grasp, chizata, meaning that any branch that is narrow enough to fit in one's palm is considered shaky. First of all, the question is supposed, since a slightly bigger branch would also shake if a person climbed on it. Others suggest that there is a distinction between a branch that is intrinsically weak and a branch that is not so easily movable but still gets weakened by a person's weight. He's imagining the bone. The Rosh explains this statement like Rashi, but understands that the item is grasped underneath one's arm rather than in one's palm, which refers to a thicker branch. Rabbi Hananel offers another interpretation that this branch is entangled with other branches so that it has to be moved from its place in order to climb on top of it. Since it moved, it would seem that it is a branch of little strength. A similar explanation is given by the Rambam as well. Finally, some explain that the branch refers to a branch that is exceptionally small, such that it is hidden from view from other branches of the tree and is not even visible from the outside. A branch on the side is not generally strong enough to hold 2 people without shaking. We learn in a Mishnah elsewhere in Ahalot 18:6 with regard to one who walks in an area in which uncertainty exists concerning the location of a grave or corpse, a Beis HaParas, Hamhalech Bebeis HaParas. A Beis HaParas is a location that possibly contains rich impurity imparted by a corpse. In this case, it appears that graves were plowed over this location, causing bones from the corpses to be scattered across the field. Consequently, if one steps on them and moves them, he has thereby become richly impure despite the fact that he does not know precisely where the bones are hidden. When a Jew does not come into contact with the field directly but is carried on another Jew, the one carrying him might become richly impure. See Tosfot. But the one being carried does not become richly impure. If a Jew rides on a Gentile or on an animal, he also does not become richly impure. When he rides on a weak animal and is carried by a weak person, Since the weight is a greater burden to them, it is as though he himself was treading on the ground, and he therefore does become ritually impure. If he treads over stones, then he can move as he walks, raising concerns that he might have moved a bone of a corpse and thereby rendered him impure. Or if he was in that location on the back of a person or riding on an animal that has little strength, he is impure, as he is considered to have moved the impurity himself. The Gemara asks, what are the circumstances of a person that has little strength? So it's like I said, any person whose knees knock, what does that mean? If one was riding an animal or being carried by a person made of paras, if the person or animal carrying him was strong enough to bear his weight, he remained virtually pure. If the person carrying him was so weak that his knees knocked together from his weight, or the animal he was riding defecated due to the burden, he is rendered impure, as he is considered to have passed on foot. Rama Sefer Tahara Hechot Tumas Meis 10:11. Against each other when someone rides upon him. What are the circumstances of an animal that has little strength? The sage of the school of Bava say, any animal that releases excrement due to strain when a person rides upon it. As the Gemara has cited rulings of the school of Bava with regard to measurements, it now cites similar halacha that the sages of the school of Bava state with regard to prayer and with regard to phylacteries. The measure is 4 kav. The Gemara inquires, what is the relevance of this measure with regard to prayer? This is as it is taught in a Braita. With regard to one who carries a load on his shoulder, and the time for prayer arrives, with regard to a person who is carrying a burden, when the time for prayer arrives, if the load is less than 4 kav, he loads it behind him while still holding it and prays. If it was 4 kav or more, he must place it on the ground before he prays. That's the Rambam Sefer Hava Hilchot Tefillah 5 Shulchan Aruch Chaim 97:5. If the load is less than 4 kav, he loads it behind him while he's still holding it and prays, as a light load of this size does not interfere with prayer. If the load is 4 kav, he places it on the ground and prays. What is the relevance of this amount with regard to phylacteries? This is as it's taught in the Braita. If a man was carrying a load, these halacha were primarily relevant in Talmudic times when people would wear phylacteries all day long, even when they went to work. The Gemara therefore discusses cases in which the phylacteries must be removed so that they will not be treated in a disrespectful manner. Some of the most prominent halacha authorities cite both the Braita, statement of Rav Sheila, that follows. Despite the apparent contradiction between them, one explanation is that the Braita is referring to one whose job was to carry loads of this kind, Mari Abuhab, or to a case where the bundle is already on his head, and he now wishes to don phylacteries. By contrast, Bashena is addressing the case of an ordinary person or one who was wearing phylacteries and now wishes to place a load on his head, and he has phylacteries on his head. If one was bearing a load on his head, he must remove the phylacteries from his head until he removes the load. It is even prohibited to place a scarf in which the phylacteries are kept on his head while wearing the phylacteries, but he is permitted to wear a hat or usual headgear while wearing phylacteries as long as it is less than 4 kav. And the Ramah, some later authorities contend that it's permitted even when he's wearing phylacteries so he can move the burden to the side of his head so they don't touch that the Purim Megadim. And this is permitted as long as the load is less than 4 kav. Rama Sefer Hava Hilchot Tefillah Mezuzah Sefer Torah 423 Shulchan Aruch Chaim 21:1, and see the Mishnah Berurah there. And the phylacteries being crushed under the load, it is forbidden to leave them on his head, but if they were not being crushed, it is permitted. With regard to which load did the sage state this halacha? He states with regard to a load of 4 kav. Rabbi teaches, with regard to one who removes garbage by carrying it on his head and has phylacteries on his head, he may not move the phylacteries to the side to prevent them from being crushed, and likewise he may not tie the phylacteries of his head to his loins because he thereby treats him in a manner of degradation. But he may tie them on his arm in the location where the phylacteries of the hand are placed. The sages said in the name of the school of Sheila, it is forbidden to place on the head of one that has phylacteries on it even the scarf in which they are wrapped. The Gemara asks, and how much does Rabbi Sheila permit to one to place on his head while wearing phylacteries? Abai said, even as little as 1/4 of the smallest measurement of Pumbedita is still forbidden from place on one's head. The Mishnah teaches, Rabbi Yehuda says, what fixed measure is a pile? Well, the relevant issue is whether it has a crop equivalent to the measure of seeds for dropping in a field in order to sow it. The Gemara asks, and how much is equivalent to the measure of seeds for dropping in a field in order to sow it? Rabbi Ami says that Rabbi Yochanan said 4 seah for the amount of land sufficient to grow a core. Rabbi Ami himself, though it says 8 seah for the amount of land sufficient to grow a core. A certain elder said to Rav Hama, son of Rabba Avu, I will explain it to you. In the years of Rabbi Yochanan, the land was fat. There's much discussion, especially in the Jewish time, about the sharp descent of the land's fertility in the generations of Amoraim. In fact, Rabbi Yochanan himself noted that there is a difference in the quality of the land in his own lifetime. This is apparently due to the increasingly heavy economic burden placed upon Jewish communities in those days, which prevented farmers from investing in the upkeep of the land through techniques such as fertilizers and providing the land with fallow years. Consequently, the land was increasingly overused, which led to a decrease in its productive capability. Well, in the years of Rabbi Ami, the land was lean, and it was therefore necessary to double the amount of seed for each unit of land. We learned in a Mishnah elsewhere in Peah 5:1, if the wind scattered the standing sheaves, so that the owner's harvest was mixed with the gleanings, the amount of gleanings this field was fit to produce is evaluated. This amount is determined as for an area of a core, which you must give to the poor. This ruling of the Rambam is based on the approach that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel does not disagree with the first Tana, but clarifies his ruling in Sefer Zerayim, Mitenat Inayim 4:5. See the Kesef Mishnah and the Rabbis there. So that it is no longer known which gleanings fell from the sheaves during the harvest and belongs to the poor. One evaluates how many gleanings, gleanings. The Torah prohibits the owner of the field from gleaning individual stalks that have fallen during the harvest. Leviticus 19:9. Rather, these stalks must be left in the field by the owner as one of the obligatory agricultural gifts given to the poor. Gleanings are often defined as fewer than 3 stalks that fall in one location. Welcome gleanings are mentioned in the Torah in Leviticus 19:9 in the book of Ruth and in Tractate Peah of the Mishnah. The basic idea is that stalks that fell from the sheaves in specific ways must be left by the owner of the field for the poor. If these gleanings were inadvertently mixed with the owner's bundles by him or by the wind, he must give the poor the share to which they are entitled. It was fit to produce, and he gives these to the poor. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says he gives to the poor the amount equivalent to the measure of seeds dropping in the course of harvesting. So what does that mean? Some commentators maintain that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel does not disagree with the first Tana, but simply clarifies the ruling by adding that there is a fixed minimum requirement for such gleanings. By contrast, the Rambam explains in his commentary on the Mishnah that the phrase "the amount equivalent to seeds dropping in the course of harvesting" means in accordance with the amount required for this to seed this field, which is approximately the amount of gleanings it would produce. The Gemara asks, and how much is the amount equivalent to the measure of seeds dropping in the course of harvesting? When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he said that Rabbi Elazar said, and some say Rabbi Yochanan, 4 kav for a core. Rabbi Yirmiyah raises a dilemma. Does this mean for a field that requires a core of seed to plant it, or for a core of produce? And if it is the former, does it refer to sowing by hand or to sowing by oxen? What does that mean? The Mapolis yard, the Mapolis Sevorim. In the ancient world, seeds were sown by one of 2 methods. Some farmers would plough the land, after which they would sow the seeds by hand. Others would affix a box filled with seeds to the plough, put by the oxen so that the seeds would automatically spill out onto the ploughed furrow. The second method was less time consuming but required a far greater amount of seeds than the first, as more seeds would fall automatically as the plough moved than if a person carefully sowed the amount of seeds he desired. The Gemara answers, common here as when Ravman came from Eretz Yisrael, he said that Rabbi Avu said that Rabbi Elazar said, and some say that Rabbi Yochanan said 4 kav for a field sown with a core of seed. The Gemara comments, and the other question should still raise a dilemma for you. Does this refer to sowing by hand or by sowing by oxen? No answer was found to this question, and the dilemma shall stand unresolved. In a case of one who receives a field from another to cultivate, and grasshoppers consumed it, or it was wind blasted. What does that mean? Mekaba Sadva Achala Chagav or Niftafa. If one received a field as a tenant farmer or rented it for money and it was consumed by grasshoppers or wind blasted, if this occurred to most of the fields in that city, he subtracts the amount lost from the amount he paid for his tenancy. This ruling is according with the version of the text accepted by the majority of the early commentators, which reads, the majority of fields, but not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who does not agree that this is the case when he rents a field and pays the owner with money. Bava Metzia Daf 85 Shulchan 322:1. Nistafa. This blight probably refers to the plant disease caused by Ustilago smut fungi. These parasites replace the normal kernels of grain with large distorted black tumors. These tumors, in turn, are carried by the wind and infect the surrounding plants. The Ustilago fungus then spread over great distances and cause significant damage to crops. Or if it's a regional disaster which affected all fields in the area, the cultivator subtracts from the produce as he owes as part of his tenancy. If it is not a regional disaster, the cultivator does not subtract from the produce he owes as part of his tenancy. Rabbi Yehuda says, if the cultivator received from the owner for a fixed sum of money. According to Rabbi Yehuda, a tenant farm is essentially viewed as a purchase of field for a limited period. Therefore, he should not be able to subtract any amount at all from what he owes. But since the owner receives a portion of the crop itself, the tenant farmer can claim that the landowner must also bear his share of a regional disaster. Consequently, if the retail was for money, not for some of the yield, the owner is paid in full. See the later commentaries for a lengthy discussion of this issue. Whether this way, there was a regional disaster, or whether that way, there was no regional disaster, he does not subtract the produce he owes from the part of his tenancy. They might ask, what are the circumstances of a regional disaster? Rabbi Yehuda said, if, for example, most of that valley in which fields located was wind blasted, is considered a regional disaster. Others said, if, for example, 4 fields were wind blasted on 4 sides, it is considered a regional disaster. But also said they raised the following dilemma in the west, Eretz Yisrael. If one furrow was wind blasted along its entire length, adjacent to other fields that were wind blasted, was halacha. It is considered to be part of the regional disaster. Conversely, if one furrow remained undamaged along the entire length, was halacha. Does the remaining furrow mean that the entire field is not considered to be part of the regional disaster? If a fallow field divided between the cultivated fields and the fields that were wind blasted, was halacha. Alternatively, if there's a field of fodder between the field and the others that were wind blasted, was halacha. Fodder, avpasta. This word originates from the Pahlavi word aspast, which means fodder for horses. That's the end of the Amud. Thank you for listening. Wish you a very good day and peace in Israel. All the best. Bye.